Okay, so we've gotten a couple things out of the way: the price of the home, the George bringing this into the home. I do want to elaborate on that a little bit further. So one of the first things that George began to experience in the home was this feeling of constantly being cold. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this one simply because I think that this can be explained in a couple different ways. First of all, they lived up north in the northeast United States. It's very cold up there. And in an older home, I can definitely see how there would be drafts in the home and he would feel cold. Now, on the flip side of that, you can sit there and say, with the case that I've just made, it could be a combination of the two, really. You know, George began to become withdrawn, and that was, he admittedly, that was actually, not just in the book and the movie. He became withdrawn. He stopped going to work. He stopped being so responsible, and he was always cold. And to me, that indicates that something was pulling his energy out of him, and he was in this state of just depression where he stopped caring about anything. And I think it was during this time where Danny really began to have a rocky, well, it was already kind of rocky before that, but I think things really took a downturn there. And some real damage was done for their family relationship. But again, I could go either way with that one. The cold, I'm leaning more towards, I think it was a combination of both. I think the cold was kind of a combination of them living in the Northeast United States, but also George himself was the only one that was cold. So I think that speaks to the fact that he had something pulling his energy from him and using it to manifest itself in the house, if you will. Okay, so the next thing. Did flies really attack a priest who came to bless the home? Now, this is another fact that I kind of find it difficult to believe. Now, Danny did kind of talk about this in the My Amityville Horror. He had mentioned that there was this sewing room, I think, was where all these flies would congregate, hundreds and hundreds of flies. Listen, animals and bugs do weird things. So I'm hesitant to attribute that to a paranormal occurrence. Could there have been something in the home that was causing the flies to congregate there? Sure. What? I don't know. But I think it's really difficult when you start involving things like that. So I can definitely understand why the church really didn't want anything to do with this case and maybe even denied it after this, because they probably were getting so much negative publicity from the movie The Exorcist because it came out right around the same time. The My Amityville Horror documentary, Danny goes on to talk about how this priest really did come to the home, and he just abruptly left. That's all that really happened there. Supposedly, he had asked Kathy Lutz if she planned on using the sewing room, and, if she did, not to make that into a bedroom. And that was kind of it. And so what does that mean? Not much. I think that the Catholic Church's denial of ever going there is kind of wrong. I believe they did go there to bless the home. I believe that the priest probably went into the home and got a kind of bad vibes and decided to leave. My dad was an elder in the church growing up, and he would tell you to this day that there was nothing that went on in our home that was paranormal. There was no ghost. There was nothing. We knew otherwise, and I believe that he knows otherwise, but he'll never admit it. I think it's just easier to say that stuff just doesn't exist, but I lived it and experienced it. I know that it's real. So really, this is one of the first things that I remember happening in the home. We had some friends over from church. It was probably a Sunday night. We were all kind of sitting around in our big living room and hanging out and talking, and us kids had been upstairs in my dad's room, which we really weren't supposed to be up there. We were also kind of playing with his stereo. Now, what you have to remember is this happened back in the 80s, all right? So there was no remote controls. There was no, what as a stereo today. It was not like that back then. It was literally like a light switch kind of deal that you had to hit to go on, and there was a dial that you had to turn to put the volume on. We had been up there listening to the radio and everything at the lowest volume setting you could imagine. Then at some point we went back downstairs. We had been back downstairs for about 30 minutes or so. I don't really know. all of a sudden, my dad's stereo was on full blast upstairs. Now, these were big speakers that were attached to this, and it was shaking the entire house. So immediately we're blamed. We're all in the room, and we could not have done it. Once that registered in my dad's head, he went and got his gun. He gave one to one of the friend of the family that was there that night as well. They went and searched the whole house. There was nothing, no one in the house. They went all the way to the attic. I guess the way that was dealt with is just to pretend that it didn't happen. I don't know. So yeah, the outcome is there. I think that the church pretended that it just didn't happen, much like many people. I don't care what religion you're in. They tend to not want to talk about the demonic at all. If we just don't talk about it, it's not real. I think that's kind of wrong because it really leaves people like the Lutzes hanging there. Regardless of how it began, I think that they should have been helped. I think as far as the flies go, that's tough because I think animals, insects, they do weird things. And I don't think that, according to Danny and according to the book, there was just hundreds and hundreds of flies in the sewing room. And I don't think you can attribute that to paranormal activity. I just don't. I think that there's got to be a logical explanation there. Also, I think what happens there, now I don't know if this happened in the same room, but Danny talked about how his hands, a window had come down and smashed his hands. And I think that's a lot like the insects. I think the moment that happened, whether you're talking about insects or other events that happened, like his hands being smashed, I think that it's really easy, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, I have to be very careful when I recount things that happened in our home because it's very easy to start filling in the blanks with things that didn't happen. And I think that happens more often than not. So I'm very careful when I'm retelling things because I want to be sure that I'm being accurate. And like I said, if there's a missing chunk of a story, you'll fill it in with something. So maybe he remembers hundreds and hundreds of flies just coming back. Maybe he remembers his hands being smashed in the window and his hands were just flat and they went back to normal. Maybe it really wasn't that bad. I don't know. I wasn't there. It's hard for me to say, but I do know that sometimes we can remember things wrong. Jody the pig. That one's an easy one. We can just skip right on past that. That was made up for the book. It was basically loosely based on the DeFeo family had a cat named Jody that the dad would often call a fat pig. That's it. They just threw Jody the pig into the book and the movie. Okay, so what happened the night that the Lutz family fled the home? No one really knows. That I got a better indication. I listened to an old Art Bell show where he interviewed George Lutz, and he actually got George to talk about it a little bit. And to some degree, I think that George doesn't want to say what happened that night. Simply, you did get some stories about levitations that happened that night and everything. Okay, cool. But I think much more than that happened. But they actually left midday the day after that all this stuff took place. I think that the movie's portrayal of either one of what George did, I think is closer to the truth. Now, he had told Art in that interview that Kathy was levitating and he tried pulling her back and all this other stuff, but there has to be more than that because that had happened already, right? That had happened a couple different times. He had also talked about how Kathy was changing into this old hag and stuff. There was so many different things that happened that what happened that they decided that was too much. I think it was something George did, personally. And I also think that might give you some better indication of why Danny hates him so much. I think there's a lot more to this than what we know. Like I said, I don't know what actually happened, but I do know that George refuses to talk about it. And it was so bad that they left everything they owned and left that home behind. All their possessions, everything. They left it all. Now, in regards to just, I know a lot of people find it pretty difficult to believe you could just get up and walk away from everything you had. I remember when my mom passed away. I remember going through the house as she was sitting in hospice, and we're going through the entire house, and there was so much occult stuff in the house. We walked up on, altar tables and all kinds of stuff that she had set up. You know what? I don't want anything from this home. I didn't take pictures. I didn't take home movies. I didn't take anything. I didn't want it. As far as I was concerned, I just wanted to leave all that behind. I didn't need it. So now, to this day, I have very few. I don't have any pictures. My sister has them all. We have some home movies that my dad had. But so yeah, I can definitely see them being like, you know what, we didn't need any of that. So in closing, do I believe the Amityville horror is a true story? I think there are elements of it that are true. There are elements of it that are made up. But I think that's true of any movie that you watch that's supposedly based on a true story. It's very difficult to navigate through all that. The only way that I can do it is try to relate to things that I've experienced in my own life and what I'm willing to believe and what I'm not willing to believe. But I do think that there were elements of the truth. I think that you're dealing with a very disturbed family, and I really wanted to kind of paint George as this villain, because that's the way the movie kind of portrays him. But I don't think he was. I think he was a man that got himself mixed up in some things that he had no control of, and maybe he thought that he did. And after moving into that home, I think it became evidently clear, and it was just something they all wanted to leave behind. I think it destroyed that family. So in the end, I think you have to make up your own mind. For many of us, the truth is just too scary. It's easier to believe that this is all based in fiction. I think that the truth sometimes is much scarier than fiction. But you'll have to make up your own mind there. Hopefully I did a decent job in convincing you as to why I don't believe that the Amityville home was haunted, but I do believe that the Lutz family was haunted, and I think that we have a very clear indication of that if you look at the home now. There's nothing going on there. They want that all to be left behind. So I don't believe it was a hoax, but I do believe that there were many elements of the story that were made up to kind of make a movie or a book. So yeah, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed the video, and leave a like. Thanks.